Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into a scandal that really shook up 14th century France. It's called the Tour de Nesle affair.
Ooh, okay.
And this whole thing, um, well, just imagine. Imagine you have this royal family. They're at the top. They've got it all. But then, boom, all these accusations come out. Adultery, betrayal, and the punishments. They were brutal, just brutal.
Sounds kind of familiar, huh? Like ripped from the headlines, but this happened like over 700 years ago.
I know, right? Crazy. We're going to be getting to the lives of three princesses who got caught up in all this. Blanche, Margaret, and Joan.
You know, what always gets me about this story is how these women, princesses, royalty, right? But they were just pawns, totally at the mercy of, well, everyone, really. But especially their father, King Philip IV of France.
Yeah, King Philip IV. He was not exactly Father of the Year material. From what I've read, he sounds pretty ruthless.
Ruthless is putting it mildly. The guy was obsessed with power. Like, it was all he cared about. And his kids, they were just tools, ways to get more power. He set up all these marriages, like a chessboard, trying to control everything.
Okay, so arranged marriages, that was pretty standard back then.
Yeah.
But how did Philip's scheming lead to this giant scandal?
All right, so each marriage was, its own mess. Like his oldest son, Louis, he was supposed to marry this woman, Joan, but then Philip, the king, he breaks it off, decides Louis needs to marry Margaret of Burgundy. Burgundy was a big deal back then strategically, so this marriage, it was all about control.
So Louis gets shipped off to Burgundy, heartbroken but strategically married. What about the other sons?
Okay, so Philip's second son, also named Philip, ends up marrying Joan, the one Louis was supposed to marry. This just shows you how much the king wanted to lock down Burgundy. Then you've got Charles, the youngest. He was just a kid, a teenager, when Philip decided he had to marry Blanche.
Blanche?
Joan's younger sister. Oh, and she was only 12 years old at the time.
Whoa. 12. That's messed up. I mean, even back then, wasn't there something like rules against marrying off kids that young? What did the church say about all of this?
Oh, yeah, there are definitely rules. And this marriage, it was a huge scandal, not just because of the age difference, but because Blanche's mom was Charles's godmother.
Godmother. So that made them, what, like spiritually related? I bet the church wasn't happy about that.
Not at all. It was a big no-no.
Oh.
But Philip, well, he wasn't going to let a little thing like religious law get in his way.
Yeah, sounds like him. So how did he get away with it?
He got a papal dispensation. Basically, he got the Pope to give him a pass to say it was okay. That tells you how much power he had, even over the church.
Wow. So he was really playing hardball. Okay, and just to complete the family portrait, we have Isabella, the daughter. Her marriage was a big deal too, right?
Huge. He married her off to Edward II of England, and that decision would come back to haunt them later on, big time. It was one of the things that led to the 100 Years' War.
Oh, wow. But that's a story for another time.
Right, right. For now, the important thing is to see how all these marriages, all this planning and scheming, it created a powder keg. And eventually, it was going to explode.
So we've got the stage set. A king obsessed with power, a family held together by strategy, not love, and a whole lot of tension simmering under the surface. I have a feeling things are about to get messy.
Oh, you have no idea. But before we get into the scandal itself, there's a question worth asking. Were any of these couples actually happy? From what we know, it seems like Philip and Joan, the second son and his wife, they actually had a good thing going. He even said publicly that they had a loving and harmonious life. But as for the others, well, let's just say it was complicated.
Complicated, that's one way to put it. So how did this whole scandal come to light? Who spilled the tea?
It's kind of murky, lost in the rumors of the court. Some say it was Isabella, Philip's daughter, the one who was Queen of England. Apparently, she figured something was going on and told her dad.
Juicy. A
Oh.
little family drama across the English Channel. So what was the affair about? Who was involved?
All right, get this. The accusations were about two of the princesses. Margaret, the one married to Louis and Blanche, the child bride married to Charles. They were accused of having affairs with two brothers, Philip and Gautier d'Aunay, both knights from a pretty minor noble family.
Hold on. Two princesses, two brothers. Sounds like a soap opera.
Right. And the place they supposedly met, that adds to the whole drama. The Tour de Nesle, a tower in Paris, all kinds of secrets and rumors swirling around it.
Okay, so we've got accusations of infidelity, not one, but two princesses involved. What did Philip the Faith, the king, do about it? I can't imagine he was happy.
Knowing Philip, he was probably furious. He was all about control, and this whole thing, it threatened everything he'd built.
So what did he do? Did he just ignore it, or did heads start to roll?
Let's just say Philip wasn't exactly known for his mercy. The Donné brothers, they were arrested immediately. And then the torture began.
Oh, man. This is where things take a dark turn. What happened to those brothers?
After days of torture, one of them finally confessed to the affair. They were both found guilty of treason. Messing with royal marriages was a big deal, and they got the worst possible punishment, a public execution.
Wow, that's intense. Talk about absolute power. What about Margaret and Blanche? What did their father do to them?
They didn't get off easy, that's for sure. Public humiliation, and then they were sent to Chateau Gaillard, a prison known for being, well, absolutely terrible. Life imprisonment.
Okay, so 2 princesses locked up, 2 knights dead. It feels like there's more to this story. What about Joan, the 3rd princess, the one married to Philip the Younger? Was she involved at all?
Joan was arrested too, but not for adultery. They accused her of knowing about the affairs and helping to cover them up. But her husband, Philip, he really went to bat for her, said she was innocent, and eventually she was released.
That's interesting. Her fate was so different from her sisters-in-law. Why do you think her husband defended her so strongly? Was it love or something else?
There are a few theories. Some historians think it was purely strategic. Joan came from a powerful family, rich, lots of connections. It made sense to keep her around. But others believe that Philip really did love her and believed she was innocent.
I guess we'll never know for sure. It just adds another layer to this whole tangled web. So we've got imprisonment, executions, political maneuvering, and then bam, King Philip V, dies. Just a few months after this whole scandal breaks.
Yeah, that threw a wrench into everything.
So what happened next? Who took over? Did Blanche, the one in prison, finally get her chance?
Not quite. Joan, remember the one who was exonerated? Well, her husband, Philip, he saw his chance. He took the throne, became Philip V, basically pushed his young nephew aside. And get this, he established a new law that said women couldn't inherit the throne. It's called the Salic Law.
That's a major power move.
Oh.
So Joan finally gets some power, even if it's through her husband. Seems like she's the only one who came out of this. Okay. What about Blanche? Did she stay locked up forever?
Sadly, Blanche stayed in prison. Her husband, who was now King Charles IV, he managed to get their marriage annulled. His reason. That whole spiritual relationship thing, which is kind of ironic considering his own father got special permission to ignore it. After that, Blanche basically disappears from history. Some sources say she lived out her days in some remote castle. Others say she became a nun.
That's a sad ending for Blanche. A pawn in her family's games. It makes you think about the real cost of all this power grabbing. But before we move on, can we go back to the affair itself? Do we even know if it actually happened?
That's the big question, isn't it? The sources we have, they don't all agree. Some historians say it was real, a genuine scandal. They point to the punishments, how harsh they were, and the public humiliation.
That makes sense. You wouldn't think the king would go through all that if it wasn't true.
Right. But other historians, they think it was all made up. A political move, maybe even orchestrated by Philip V himself. He could have wanted to get rid of those daughters-in-law. They weren't producing any sons, heirs to the throne. And then he could marry his sons to women who would be more useful politically.
That's an interesting theory. So was it a real scandal or a power play? I guess we'll never know for sure.
That's history for you. Sometimes the truth gets lost. We're left with clues, and we have to try to figure it out. But even without knowing everything, the story is fascinating. It makes you think about power, ambition, love, and what people are capable of.
It really does. Okay, so we've got imprisoned princesses, executed knights, a dead king, and lots of political scheming. What happens next?
Well, remember that Philip V, Joan's husband, he made that rule about women not inheriting the throne. He thought he was securing his power, but it would come back to bite the French monarchy big time.
How so?
Well, Philip V died in 1322, and guess what? He didn't have any sons, just daughters.
And because of that Salic law?
Exactly. His daughters couldn't take the throne. So the crown went to his younger brother, Charles IV.
Charles. The one who annulled his marriage to Blanche. What a mess. Did he have any sons?
Nope. No sons for Charles either. He died in 1328, and that was it. The end of the direct line of the Capetian dynasty. No more direct heirs, and that created a massive crisis.
And that's where Isabella comes back into the picture.
Right.
Philip V's daughter, the one married to the English king.
You got it. Her son, Edward III of England, he had a pretty strong claim to the French throne through his mother's side of the family.
So Philip V's plan to keep women off the throne totally backfired. It created a power vacuum.
Big time. The French nobility, they stuck to the Salic law and chose Philip VI to be king, a cousin of the dead kings, not Edward.
So Edward III, he got cheated out of his inheritance. What did he do?
Oh, he wasn't happy. He declared war on France in 1337, and that was the beginning of the Hundred Years' War. A brutal, brutal conflict. It went on for over a century.
So this whole saga, starting with a scandal in the French royal family, basically triggered one of the most important wars in European history. It's crazy how one event can have such huge consequences.
It really is. History is all connected, even if we don't realize it. But before we jump into the Hundred Years' War, which is a whole other story, let's go back to Joan. She's the only princess who came out of this whole mess relatively unscathed. What happened to her after her husband, Philip V, died?
Yes, let's talk about Joan. It's interesting how her story is so different from her sisters-in-law. It seems like she found some peace amidst all the chaos.
She did. After Philip V died, she basically left public life, dedicated herself to her faith, became a devout Christian, and get this, she sent her youngest daughter, also named Blanche, to a nunnery.
A nunnery? Why would she do that?
The sources give us some clues. Remember, she was accused of being part of the affair, even though she was cleared. It seems like that experience really stuck with her. She felt like she needed to redeem her family, cleanse them of any stain from the scandal, and sending her daughter to live a religious life, well, she thought that would help.
That's fascinating. It shows you the kind of pressure women faced back then. It also makes you wonder if she was trying to protect her daughter from the dangers of the court after all the crazy that she'd seen.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe sending her daughter to a nunnery was a way to shield her from the fate that befell her aunts. But that wasn't the only way Joan tried to make amends. She also did something pretty significant with the Tour de Nesle, the tower where the scandal happened.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What did she do?
She left the Tour de Nesle to the University of Paris in her will for them to use as a college.
So the site of this infamous scandal became a place of learning. That's quite a transformation. What was she thinking? Was it like a way to atone for the sins that happened there?
Seems like it. She wanted to redeem the power, turn it from a symbol of betrayal and sin into a place of knowledge and opportunity. Almost like she was trying to rewrite the story of the Tour de Nesle.
That's pretty powerful, especially after all the pain and humiliation she went through because of that scandal. It's like she was trying to create a different future, one where knowledge and goodness win over ambition and betrayal. What a legacy.
It really is. It shows how resilient she was and how much she believed in redemption. She wanted to turn a dark place into something good.
So even with the scandal, the betrayals, the punishments, and the war, there's a glimmer of hope in this story. Joan, her faith, and her vision for the Tour de Nesle, it's like a quiet act of defiance against all the darkness that surrounded her family.
I like that. It's a good reminder that even in the midst of tragedy and chaos, people can choose hope, seek redemption, and try to create a better future.
So even with the scandal, the betrayals, the punishments, and the war, there's a glimmer of hope in this story. Joan, her faith, and her vision for the Tour de Nesle, it's like a quiet act of defiance against all the darkness that surrounded her family.
I like that. It's a good reminder that even in the midst of tragedy and chaos, people can choose hope, seek redemption, and try to create a better future.
Well, on that note, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the Tour de Nesle affair and explore some of the lingering questions about what it all means.
That's it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Tour de Nesle affair. It's been quite a journey, right? We've covered a lot of ground, from Philip V's crazy marriage schemes to the shocking scandal, the brutal punishments, the power struggles, and even the start of the Hundred Years' War.
It really shows how one event can have these massive ripple effects. And at the center of it all, you have these three women, Blanche, Margaret, and Joan. Their lives were completely shaped by forces they couldn't control.
Their stories really make you think about how few options women had back then, especially women in powerful positions. They were pawns in a dangerous game, their destinies decided by political alliances and what society expected of them.
Absolutely. And yet each of them reacted to their situation in different ways. Blanche, imprisoned and basically forgotten. Margaret, with that mysterious death, maybe not so accidental. And then you've got Joan, who somehow navigated the treacherous waters of court life and found her own way.
Her story is wild. She goes from being accused of being part of the affair to becoming a queen and then using her influence to turn a place of scandal into a center of learning. History is full of twists and turns like that.
And it reminds us that we only get one side of the story, the winner's side. We have these little pieces of these women's lives, glimpses into what they thought and why they did things, what really went down at the Tour de Nesle. Why were those accusations made? Were the princesses guilty, or were they victims of some elaborate scheme? We might never know the truth.
It's like a medieval mystery. We're trying to put the pieces together centuries later, but we'll never get the whole picture. But even without all the answers, this story is captivating. It makes you question everything: power, ambition, love, betrayal, and just how complex people can be.
That's what I love about history. It's not just dates and names. It's about understanding the human experience through time. And the Tour de Nesle affair, with all its messy relationships, shocking twists, and unanswered questions, it gives us this amazing look into the medieval world.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, what's the main thing you want our listeners to take away? What should they be thinking about?
I think the most important thing is to remember that history isn't simple. It's complicated with lots of different sides to every story, and there's always more going on than we can see. The Tour de Nesle affair teaches us to question the stories we hear, to look closer, to consider different perspectives, and to accept that we may never know the whole truth.
Well said. And this story, it has consequences that reach far beyond the people directly involved. It actually changed the course of history.
Exactly. The scandal, the punishments, the struggle for power, all of that led to the Hundred Years' War, and that war transformed Europe. It just goes to show our actions, even the ones that seem personal, they can have ripple effects we never imagine.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
It reminds us that everything is connected and that understanding the past can help us make better decisions in the present.
Right. And maybe avoid making the same mistakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, as we finish up our deep dive into the Tour de Nesle affair, we encourage you to keep learning about this fascinating period in history. Read more about the princesses, dive into the politics of Philip V's reign, and explore the mysteries that still surround this infamous scandal. You never know what you might discover. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Tour de Nesle affair.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the scandal, the punishments, the power struggles. But one thing that really sticks with me is the fate of those three princesses, Blanche, Margaret, and Joan. They were all caught up in this web of, I don't know, ambition and betrayal.
Yeah, their lives were really tragic in a way.
Totally. I mean, they were princesses, right? But they had almost no control over their own lives.
That's one of the things that makes this story so compelling. These women, they were pawns in a game played by men. Their marriages, their destinies, it was all about politics and what society dictated.
Exactly. And each of them dealt with it so differently. Blanche, she was imprisoned and basically forgotten. Margaret, she died under mysterious circumstances. And then you have Joan. She managed to survive the chaos and even carved out her own path.
Joan's story is fascinating. I mean, she was accused of being involved in the affair, and then she becomes queen. And in the end, she uses her power to turn a place of scandal into a center for education. It's pretty remarkable.
It really is. But it also makes you think, we're looking at all this from so far away, centuries later. We only have these fragments of their lives, these little glimpses into their thoughts and motivations. What really happened at the Tour de Nesle? Were the princesses guilty? Or were they victims of some kind of conspiracy? It's like, we'll never know for sure.
That's the thing about history, right? It's not always clear-cut. We have to look at the evidence, consider different perspectives, and sometimes we just have to accept that we'll never have all the answers.
It's like a giant puzzle with some pieces missing. But even with those missing pieces, the story is so powerful. It makes you think about the big questions, power, ambition, love, betrayal, the things that drive people then and now.
Exactly. And the Tour de Nesle affair, it's not just a story about what happened back then. It has these echoes that reach into our own time. It makes you question the narratives we're given, the stories we tell ourselves about the past, and how they shape our understanding of the world.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Tour de Nesle affair, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this?
I think the most important thing is to remember that history is complicated. It's not just about memorizing dates and names. It's about understanding the complexities of human experience across time. The Tour de Nesle affair, it shows us that. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question what we think we know, and to embrace the mystery of the past. And who knows, maybe by understanding the past, we can create a better future.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in learning more about this fascinating period in history, we encourage you to do your own digging. There are so many great resources out there. Read about the princesses, learn about the politics of the time, and see what conclusions you draw about the Tour de Nesle affair. It's a story that will stay with you long after you finish listening. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.